Hello, BookTube. It's Wednesday, and that's New Comic Book Day. And ordinarily, that day is reserved for people who go to their comic shop and buy floppies, the latest issues of the great superhero companies of Marvel and DC Comics. And for a long time, that was me as well. But Marvel and DC really don't typically do it for me. In this day and age, maybe that will change. It has periods where it swatches back and forth. It depends on some ongoing issue. The reason why it's so much weaker than it used to be in the past is because Marvel and DC both have embraced trade paperbacks. They've embraced book collections of their comics. It's not a rare thing anymore. Now it's absolutely given that everything you see as a floppy comic book on the stands is going to be collected in book form. Both companies do a lively business with libraries, and they also have locked in apparently a pattern where fans don't mind paying for the same stuff twice, so they will buy the issue and then they will buy the book. And knowing that sort of took away the thrill for me of buying latest issues. So it typically isn't the case unless Marvel or DC is doing a monthly or bi-monthly or weekly or whatever issue series that is so good that I don't want to miss it. I don't want to wait for the trade paperback, and I don't want to miss it. In which case, I'm okay with paying the $5 per issue or whatever instead of the $20 for a paperback. And that it also causes me to keep going to my local comic shop. I like one of the workers there. I like the experience of looking at the new release section, even though in this store it's tucked into a corner far in the way in the back of the second floor. It visually could not better emphasize how little a part of the store's business model comic books actually are. I still like the experience. It's such a long tradition with me in stores all over the country that I still go whenever I can. My comic shop is not that far out of my way. So I went today and found precious little. There was precious little there that interested me. But there was something, a first issue of a Conan book. Marvel recently regained the rights to most of Robert E. Howard's intellectual properties, so they're putting out Conan comic books, and they're doing a really good job. The Conan the Barbarian and Savage Sword of Conan, the two titles that they launched, have by and large been excellent. And this is a new thing. I'm pretty sure that this is a mini-series. I doubt very much that this will be an ongoing. But this is Conan the Barbarian Exodus. This is the first cover, believe it or not. Even though that is the cover of the first issue, I still bought it. That's one of my own people buying the farm on the cover. And this is entirely done. It's written, it's plotted, it's broken down, it's sketched, it's painted by Asad Ribic, who is a fan favorite artist. He's done lots and lots of work for Marvel, and I have to admit, even though he's a huge fan favorite, even though his presence as the sole creator of this thing is going to guarantee that this issue sells well, he's never really done it for me. His art really doesn't do it for me because I don't know whether he works for models or whether it's just that his way of looking at the world is different from what mine is instinctively. But a lot of times, including often in this issue, I find him giving facial expressions to characters that don't at all match what's going on around them. It's not always a deal breaker. It's not always even all that noticeable. I've loved his work on a lot of big profile Marvel stuff, and I will definitely. I will show you. I've got my arm up casually on the side of the couch here, so that might make showing you things difficult. But I want to try and convey to you the painting work that he does in this issue. The first half, there's no dialogue in this issue except untranslated Hyperborean age dialogue. We never hear any of the characters' thoughts directly. And Conan doesn't start meeting men until halfway through the issue. The first half of the issue is him leaving his homeworld, the wintry wasteland of Hyboria, and encountering one wild animal after another, all of whom he kills. And I want to show you, I wonder if I can get a really good example of this artwork. See, that is the opening page, where we just see Conan. He sets up fence work in a grotto so that he can weather out a snowstorm. And he's walking across the winter wasteland. But I want to show you, I noticed some pages that were, look at the top panel here. That is just lovely. And that is not just a matter of coloring. It's also depth as well. It's just a masterly use of all the technology at hand to create comic book artwork these days. You couldn't make a panel like that 50 years ago when Conan was last at Marvel Comics. And this, I mean, you're probably wondering what I mean by dialogue only spoken in Hyperborean. This is what I'm talking about. The characters they do speak, but we have no idea what they're saying. It's not English. It's obviously beside the point. It's obviously meant. The point we're supposed to get is that the artwork tells a story on its own. I'm kind of curious to see if Asad Ribic will do this whole storyline of Exodus without ever including any English dialogue. That would be kind of amazing. But it's the story of very young Conan, 16-year-old Conan, leaving his home world and encountering the outside world for the first time, and basically killing his way through it, and killing and stealing food, stealing water, fighting men, being left out to die by warriors, and exacting horrifying revenge. It's almost an indictment of most Conan comic books, because it underscores the fact that you don't really need much in the way of dialogue. This is not a complex story at all. Unfortunately, as with every other Marvel Conan comic in this new era, it starts with a mistake. Not an error in judgment, not an interpretation matter where they're doing it one way and you wish they were doing it another, but a simple mistake that they've been doing from the beginning when they relaunched these comics. I have sent them letters about it. Other people have sent them letters about it. It has definitely been brought to the attention of the group editor of all the Marvel Conan comics, and that group editor simply does not care. This is not the old style Marvel, which if a plain old simple mistake were brought to their attention, they would change it. This is the arrogant Marvel of 2019 that, you're just a fan. Just buy it and shut up. But we don't really want your feedback unless it's slavering praise. And the mistake that I have in mind is at the very beginning. At the beginning of every Conan issue, before we get to the story, we get the Numidian Chronicles. Know, O Prince, that between the years when the oceans drank Atlantis and the gleaming cities, and the years of the rise of the sons of Arius, there was an age undreamed of, when shining kingdoms lay spread across the world like blue mantles beneath the stars. Hither came Conan the Cimmerian, black-haired, sullen-eyed, sword in hand, a thief, a reaver, a slayer, with gigantic melancholies and gigantic mirth, who tread the jeweled thrones of earth under his sandaled feet. And the mistake is the very first line. O-H. When it's the capital letter O, with no H. And that is not fancy, and that is not snooty, and that is not falderall. That's what Robert E. Howard wrote. And that's what you're doing here. You're adapting the works of Robert E. Howard, and the only reason you have this invocation at the beginning is because he used it. But he didn't use it like that. That is a mistake. That is a spelling error. It's also a grammatical error, since the capital O is when you're addressing someone. It's actually English grammar. When you're addressing someone directly, "Oh, Henry, why won't you do this?" It is the letter O without an H. And that's been brought to Marvel's attention many times now over the last year, and they just don't care. They just don't care. They're defacing what is a lot of issues of Conan the Barbarian, a lot of issues of Savage Sword of Conan, a lot of issues of... I'm sure that this series will be really good, but it is still defaced by that error, which is in every one of these comics. And that's annoying. That's very annoying. I know that it's not an oversight anymore. It instead is it's an editorial decision on the part of Marvel Comics, and that's maddening. They're just going to well, we did it this way, and you're just the fans. Buy it and shut up, but don't criticize us. But anyway, I am 100% sure that I was reading Conan stories before Asad Ribic or any of the editors involved with this comic were born. I'm 100% sure of that. And I'm sure that a lot of other people who wrote in also know this. For instance, Jason Aaron's, who has often collaborated with Asad Ribic and who has been a foremost writer on Marvel's Conan in this new incarnation, has to know it. He did a viral shot on social media of his Conan collection of novels. He has to know that this is wrong. So has he been shouted down, or does he just not care? I don't know, one way or another. But that was the only thing I got today at the comic shop, was Conan Exodus #1, and I really liked it. Even though I'm not sure how much you can do without including any dialogue in English. I'm interested to see I'm interested, and it's gorgeous. The artwork throughout is just absolutely gorgeous. The color palette is just amazing, just amazing. Let me give you another example. I don't know how well they're coming across on this crappy camera in this dodgy lighting. Yeah, see, at one point, men leave Conan strung up, and look at the blood reds like that. Just amazing. And the reds fade to darker as night comes on. Just wonderful. And the whole issue is like that. It's a feast for the eyes. This is the only thing that I got. Ordinarily, when I'm at the comic shop, I also search for collections, graphic novels, hardcovers, commemorative reissues, stuff like that. I'm very much in the market for those things because they reprint stuff I know I already like. And there was a reprint that was technically tagged for today's date. It was a Marvel Masterworks. Marvel has a series of hardcover reprint volumes called Marvel Masterworks. They're like $75 or $80 a piece. And I can't justify spending that on a brand new Marvel Masterwork when I know that in a matter of days, if not hours, they're going to be half that at a host of different websites and on Amazon. So it's just an inflated price. It's inflated beyond what the market wants to pay. And again, Marvel has not changed that. So the market will pay $50 for one of these things. I would have done it today. It's a Marvel Masterworks volume of Marvel 2-in-1, which the old Marvel 2-in-1, there's a current comic, I think, that's still going, and Marvel called that. But for years, Marvel 2-in-1 was a team-up book featuring the ever-loving Blue-Eyed Thing from the Fantastic Four, Benjamin J. Grimm, who was sort of an everyman in Marvel Comics, and Marvel had two everymen. They had the Thing and they had Spider-Man, and both of them had team-up books, where every month they would team up with a new character. And Marvel Masterworks, the new one that's out today, is the latest volume of reprints of Marvel 2-in-1. And it's all artwork by Ron Wilson, who is, I think, underrated as an artist. I really like his work. And I remember these issues. I remember them fondly. So I will be interested in that volume. I wasn't interested in paying $80 for it. And by the same token, there was a collected volume last week that I was interested in. But I already have it, and there weren't enough additions to the new volume, to the new reprint, to really justify it. But I want to show it to you anyway. I was going to make a separate video about it, but I've completely slipped my mind. This is what I would have talked about last week. It's by Alex Ross and Jim Krueger and Doug Braithwaite, and it's called Justice. Look at that cover, huh? That is an Alex Ross cover. This is classic DC. Alex Ross and Jim Krueger did the plots and the basic story. The story is huge. It involves every villain in the DC universe, every hero in the DC universe. It's a massively complex story involving regenerative tissue and Aqua Baby and a massive war, and it's just a gigantic, the ultimate slugfest between all of DC's heroes and all of DC's villains. And Alex Ross and Jim Krueger did the plotting, and they did a lot of the dialogues. Every single joke that any of these characters you could ever imagine them telling is in here. And then Jim Braithwaite did the artwork in conjunction with Alex Ross. So the artwork very much feels like Alex Ross, but it is not totally him. I confess I'm a little unclear on who does what and how. It very much feels like Alex Ross, but also a little different. So I'm assuming here that Jim Braithwaite did the pencils, that he did the breakdowns, the panels, and the pencils, and that Alex Ross then reworked or laid over the inking and the coloring and all that. I'm assuming it broke down something like that. It's as close as you're going to get to Alex Ross illustrating a monthly comic, which is what this was. This was a miniseries. It's collected into one volume, and it includes everybody, just everybody. I don't know if I could get a big crowd shot, but the cast of characters here is just enormous. All of the classic imagery of okay, I'm not going to be able to find a big set piece, but that's okay. All of the classic imagery is in here. The Superman's old Fortress of Solitude with the gigantic metal arrow pointing to its doorway. The Marvel family, the Bat family, all of the classic iterations of the villains, all the classic iterations of the heroes. And by classic, I mean something very specific. This whole thing, this miniseries and this book, which was reissued last week in some sort of commemorative format, is a gigantic exercise, in my opinion, almost a borderline unhealthy exercise in nostalgia. Because this isn't just any period, and it isn't just any visual iconography of this DC pantheon. It's an artist that I've mentioned on this channel before, Jose Luis Garcia Lopez, who in the 1970s did a style book. He did comic books. He did illustrations of comic books for DC, and he's terrific. He's absolutely amazing. But he also did, in a way, arguably his more important contribution to DC Comics was a style book. He did a style book for virtually every character in the DC roster, hero and villain, in which, in just a straight-on, horizontal perspective, he showed you their front, their side, their back, and them in motion. Usually 4 illustrations in a row of everybody, from Superman on down. Every character. He used that style book to sort of cement in place the 1970s appearances of all of these characters and what they look like, and how they move, and exactly how their costume works. John Romita Sr. did something very similar for Marvel about a decade earlier, but he didn't do it officially. He sort of oversaw the visual continuity of Marvel Comics, so that if you got, if Madame Medusa from the Inhumans showed up in Herb Trimpe's Hulk comic, it was John Romita Sr. who would make sure that she looked exactly the same as she had in every other issue, of every other appearance in every other comic book. And John Romita Sr. did a whole bunch of sketches that were designed to be visual guidelines, a style book. But Jose Luis Garcia Lopez did it much more officially. And it's not a coincidence that he did that, because his illustrations were so good, so happy, so embodying of the pure optimism of DC Comics at the time, that they were used on T-shirts, they were used on mugs, cups, keychains, you name it. They were everywhere. Posters as well. And Alex Ross loves that period in DC Comics, and has been drawing, full-on nostalgia flashbacks to that period ever since. His whole contemporary career. Oh, there's the bean. Oh, you're getting a lot of the bean today. I think he's a little bit unhealthily fixated on it. It is clear. This is a great story. It's a fantastic graphic novel. Don't get me wrong. You're going to love it, especially if you were alive to read those classic iterations of these characters. But the implication that you draw from this couldn't be much clearer, and that's when comics were good. And I don't agree with that. I mean, if you take that idea, then you write off all of the creativity that's gone into these characters since, no matter how destructive that has been. This is a throwback to a DC Comics before the death of Superman, before Bane broke Batman's back, before Wonder Woman had all of her character ups and downs, before the death of the Flash, before the crises that took place in Green Lantern's life, not to mention all the other characters. I understand some of the nostalgic motive behind this. DC characters are often reinvented. Aquaman loses his hand and gets a hook in its place, that sort of nonsense. They're often reinvented in ways that don't feel right. Some of that character messing around feels okay if you do it with Marvel, at least if it's temporary. DC characters are far more iconic, and you kind of want them to stay that way. You kind of want to prove, as I think was the genesis of this book, that you can tell fantastic, interesting, funny, involving stories with these iconic characters without bringing them down into the muck, without making them relevant or depowering them or race swapping or gender swapping or anything like that. You can tell great stories without doing that. And this is one of those. I took it off the shelf when I realized that I was not going to bother with buying a reprint last week, and I've been lovingly rereading it, and it's a joy. Don't get me wrong, it's a joy. It's just I think there are some elements in it that probably aren't healthy. I mean, I don't know. Maybe I'm not putting it right, but this was the thing that I was going to get last week. If I hadn't, if the reprint volume that they brought out last week had been different enough to warrant it. But I have the hardcover of this, so I don't really need it. And that was my comic book experience for this Wednesday. This was not a part of it, although I noticed that the comic shop was sold out. I think they had 2 copies of this, and they sold them both. So that's interesting. And then Conan, a new Conan series about a very young Conan the Barbarian. No idea how long this will last. No idea if this is one of 6 or one of 4 or something like that. But I'll be buying the issues. Number 1 was easily good enough. And that was it. That was my comic experience. No, as far as buying comics today, no superheroes. Just Conan. We'll have to hope for better next week. Superman? Even Batman? Some variation of the Justice League? Maybe something at Marvel? Who knows? I will be back next Wednesday to let you know. So I'll see you then. Thank you, BookTube.